The white passenger's voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't care what her ticket says, that window seat is mine, and I want her removed now." The shrill voice of Bethany Caldwell, a white woman, cut through the first-class cabin like a knife. Heads turned as this heavy-set woman in designer clothes pointed an accusatory finger at 16-year-old Zara Braham, who sat quietly clutching her boarding pass. Zara replied, "I've already told you, ma'am, I'm not leaving because this is my assigned seat. Do I look like I care? People like you don't belong in first class anyway." Bethany's face reddened as she gestured with condescension and dismissively at Zara. "If you don't want to move, then I will call the flight attendant and security to get you out." Before Zara could reply, Bethany bent over to her and aggressively pulled Zara's cheeks, causing her so much pain. The young black girl stared out the window, her reflection showing a face fighting to maintain dignity under the humiliating assault. She clutched her phone as she texted her father, the only hope out of this situation. "Have you ever been discriminated against and wished you could do something about it? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you stand against prejudice and racism, comment 'No injustice' and your country's flag in the comment section. And hit the subscribe button now, because this story gives the most satisfying example of instant karma you don't want to miss. Zara Braham, a 16-year-old young girl, straight-A student, and someone who's learned to navigate life with quiet confidence beyond her years. Today was supposed to be different. For the first time since she could remember, her father had promised her 2 uninterrupted weeks of his time. This trip meant everything to Zara. A vacation with her father. While most teenagers spent weekends at the mall or scrolling through social media, Zara's life looked more like this. Monday through Friday, advanced placement classes, debate team captain, volunteering at the children's hospital, weekends academic prep, piano recital, and often dinner alone with her father's empty chair, a painful reminder of the fact that he's not always around. Not that she complained. She understood her father's work was important, even if his absence left a void that achievements couldn't fill. Xavier Brenham, her father. At 47, he was one of the youngest division chiefs in FBI history, heading the counterterrorism division with the kind of quiet authority that commands respect without demanding it. The kind of man whose phone rang at 3 a.m. and presidents waited for his assessment. The kind of father who's missed more birthdays than he's attended. Xavier had promised this time would be different. 2 weeks, Zara. No phones, no emergencies, no agents calling me away, just you and me. He'd made these promises before, of course, but something in his eyes told Zara he meant it this time. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was watching his daughter grow up in photographs rather than in person. Or maybe it was the realization that soon she'd be off to college and these moments would become even rarer. Their relationship was complicated. Built on deep love but punctuated by long absences. Text messages instead of goodnight hugs, video calls on holidays, the occasional weekend when national security allowed. The Brahams weren't just wealthy, they were the kind of wealthy that didn't need to announce itself. It showed in the subtle details, the handcrafted Italian leather of their matching luggage, the ease with which Xavier arranged their first-class tickets, the casual way Zara mentioned their private beachfront villa in Bali with its infinity pool overlooking the ocean. Money wasn't something they flaunted. It was simply the background to their lives, like the air they breathed. As they arrived at the airport that morning, Zara allowed herself to believe this trip might actually happen. 2 weeks of her father's undivided attention. 2 weeks to rebuild what his demanding career had slowly eroded. 2 weeks to be daughter and father. Not just 2 people sharing the same last name and occasional dinners. Little did either of them know that before their plane even left American airspace, they would find themselves at the center of a confrontation that would test them both in unexpected ways and reveal to everyone on board exactly who Xavier Brenham really was. The golden hour of boarding for Flight 1876 to Bali was well underway. First-class passengers were already settling in, including Xavier and Zara Brenham. Father and daughter moved with the practiced ease of frequent travelers, stowing their designer carry-ons in the overhead compartments before taking their assigned seats. 3A and 3B Zara slid into her window seat, her favorite spot. From there, she could watch the choreography of airport ground crews, see the clouds during takeoff, and most importantly, escape into her own thoughts when needed. Xavier settled beside her, their pre-flight ritual unchanged since her first flight at age 7. He'd quiz her on emergency exits. She'd remind him to switch his phone to airplane mode. Small traditions that bridge the gaps between their time together. "This is going to be an amazing trip," Xavier said, squeezing his daughter's hand. The genuine smile that crossed Zara's face was rare these days, a glimpse of the little girl still present in the poised young woman she'd become. That smile faded quickly when Xavier's phone buzzed. His expression told her everything before he even checked the screen. "It's Langley," he sighed, the weight of responsibility visibly settling onto his shoulders. "Dad." "You promised," Zara whispered, trying to hide her disappointment. "I know, baby girl. It's a security briefing I need to sign off on. 10 minutes tops, I promise I'll be back before takeoff." The look they exchanged spoke volumes. Her skepticism born from 100 broken promises, his determination that this time would be different. Xavier squeezed her shoulder before making his way down the aisle, already speaking in the measured tones he reserved for national security matters. Just as Xavier disappeared through the cabin door, the atmosphere shifted. Boarding was nearly complete when Bethany Caldwell made her entrance. 38 years old, expensively maintained, with designer clothing that seemed to be fighting a losing battle against her substantial frame. Her expression broadcasted irritation like a radio signal, and the flight attendants had already adopted the strained smiles reserved for difficult passengers. "I cannot believe how hot it is in here," she announced to no one in particular, fanning herself with her boarding pass as she lumbered down the aisle, Louis Vuitton handbag swinging dangerously close to other passengers' heads. When Bethany reached row 3, she stopped abruptly, staring at Zara with narrowed eyes. "Excuse me." "You're in my seat," she declared, the statement leaving no room for question. Zara looked up momentarily confused. "I don't think so." "I'm in 3A. Well, I have a window seat." "And this is my row," Bethany insisted, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. With the composed confidence that came from being raised by one of the FBI's top officials, Zara politely held up her boarding pass. "My ticket says 3A. This is definitely my seat." Bethany snatched the boarding pass from Zara's hand, examining it before thrusting it back. "Let me see your ticket, please," Zara requested, maintaining her composure despite the woman's rudeness. After a moment of theatrical fumbling, Bethany produced her own boarding pass. "Right there in black and white, seat 3C aisle. There must be some mistake," Bethany huffed, color rising in her cheeks. "I always book window seats. I'm sorry." "But this is my assigned seat," Zara reiterated, her voice steady but firm. Something shifted in Bethany's expression then, a calculating look replacing the initial irritation. She studied Zara more carefully, taking in her appearance, her age, her race. The corners of her mouth turned downward. "Do you know who my husband is?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "People like you don't typically fly first class." The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. Several nearby passengers stiffened, uncomfortable witnesses to the ugliness unfolding. Zara's expression didn't change, though something flickered behind her eyes. A hurt quickly masked, a dignity maintained despite the blow. She'd heard comments like this before, of course, at her private school, at country clubs, at academic competitions. The surprise wasn't in hearing them now, it was in realizing they still had the power to sting. Zara said nothing, simply turning to look out the window. Her reflection showed a face practicing the careful neutrality her father had taught her. In the tense silence that followed, Bethany remained standing in the aisle, her substantial frame blocking passage for other passengers trying to reach their seats. Her chest heaved with indignation, designer scarf fluttering with each labored breath. This standoff wasn't going according to her script. The young black girl wasn't intimidated, wasn't scrambling to accommodate her demands, wasn't recognizing the natural order of things as Bethany understood them. For Bethany Caldwell, this defiance was unacceptable. "Flight attendant," she called out, her voice pitched to carry throughout the cabin. Her manicured hand shot up, fingers snapping impatiently as if summoning a servant. "I need assistance immediately." Madison, the flight attendant, appeared within moments, her professional smile firmly in place, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. At 28, she'd been flying this route long enough to recognize trouble when she saw it, to categorize difficult passengers within seconds. Bethany Caldwell registered instantly as a Category 5 hurricane in designer clothing. "How can I help you, ma'am?" Madison asked, positioning herself to keep the aisle as clear as possible while other passengers continued boarding. "This seat is obviously mine," Bethany declared, gesturing toward Zara, who remained composed by the window. "She clearly doesn't belong here, and I need you to remove her." The implications in her tone were unmistakable. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the atmosphere growing heavier with each passing moment. Madison replied, "I'd be happy to check both tickets," her voice betraying none of the disgust flickering behind her eyes. Zara handed over her boarding pass without being asked, her movements deliberate and dignified despite the humiliation of having her right to occupy space questioned so publicly. Madison examined it carefully before turning to Bethany. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass as well?" With dramatic reluctance, Bethany produced her ticket again. Madison studied both documents side by side. "Miss Braham is in her correct assigned seat 3A, Madison confirmed, handing the boarding pass back to Zara with an apologetic smile. "Miss Caldwell, your seat is 3C, the aisle seat in this same row." Bethany's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is ridiculous. I specifically requested a window seat when I booked this flight. I always fly by the window." "I understand your preference," Madison replied, her tone calibrated to be soothing without being condescending. The difficult balance perfected over years of customer service. Unfortunately, according to our system, Seat 3A was assigned to Miss Braham. If you'd like, once boarding is complete, I can check if there are any other window seats available in first class. It was a reasonable solution. Professionally delivered, but reason wasn't what Bethany Caldwell was interested in. "Absolutely not," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I refuse to sit next to her. Find her another seat or I'll have your job." The threat hung in the air, ugly and explicit. Madison's smile remained fixed in place through years of practiced customer service discipline, but something hardened in her eyes. Around them, the atmosphere had shifted. A teenager 2 rows ahead had his phone tilted just so, the camera lens visible between seats. A woman in a business suit pretended to be texting, but her phone was clearly recording. In the age of viral videos documenting public racism, several passengers had decided this incident warranted documentation. "Miss Caldwell, I cannot move another passenger who is in their assigned seat," Madison explained, her voice steady despite the threat to her employment. "However, if you're uncomfortable with your assignment, I'd be happy to see if we can accommodate you elsewhere on the aircraft." Bethany's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Do you know who I am? Who my husband is?" Without waiting for an answer, she leaned closer to Madison, her voice lowering to a stage whisper still perfectly audible to nearby passengers. "Raymond Caldwell, Assistant Director at the Department of Justice. Perhaps you've heard of him." The name drop was delivered with the confident expectation that it would change everything, that rules would suddenly bend, that deference would immediately follow. It was the card Bethany had played countless times before, watching with satisfaction as people scrambled to accommodate her once they realized the power her husband wielded. Madison's expression didn't change, though she registered the information. Assistant Director Raymond Caldwell, a name she vaguely recognized from news headlines. Enough to know the claim might be legitimate. "I understand, Miss Caldwell, but our seating policy remains the same regardless of who our passengers are connected to," Madison replied with practiced diplomacy. Meanwhile, Zara had quietly taken out her phone, thumbs hovering over the screen as she considered whether to text her father. Part of her wanted to handle this herself, to prove she didn't need rescuing, that she could face this ugliness with the dignity and composure he taught her. But another part recognized that this situation was escalating beyond what should be reasonable to handle alone. At 16, she typed quickly, "Dad, there's a situation in our row. Nothing dangerous but unpleasant. No rush, but when you're done." Her finger hovered over the send button, hesitating. Her father was in a security briefing, possibly discussing matters that affected national safety. Was her discomfort worth interrupting that? She decided against it, saving the message to drafts instead. He'd be back soon enough. What Zara didn't know was that 3 rows behind her, one of the passengers quietly observing the scene was Agent Teresa Lopez, an FBI field officer heading to Indonesia on the same security detail as Xavier. She'd recognized Zara immediately, but maintained her cover, watching the situation unfold with professional assessment. Her hand had already slipped to her phone, typing a secure message to her colleagues about the developing situation involving the director's daughter. Bethany, meanwhile, had escalated to a new level of outrage. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she declared, voice rising. "I want to speak to the captain immediately. This girl has clearly forged her ticket. There's no way she legitimately has a first-class seat. The accusation of forgery, of criminal behavior, crossed a line." Madison's professional demeanor finally cracked just slightly, her spine straightening as she prepared to shut this down decisively. "Miss Caldwell, that is a serious and unfounded accusation. Miss Braham's ticket was issued properly through our system and verified by gate agents before boarding. I must ask you to take your assigned seat, or I will need to involve our air marshal." The mention of law enforcement caused a flicker of hesitation in Bethany's expression, but it quickly hardened into renewed determination. She was too committed to back down now, too convinced of her rightness, too accustomed to the world bending to accommodate her demands. "Call security," she demanded, voice trembling with indignation. "Call them right now. I want this investigated immediately." What Bethany Caldwell couldn't possibly know was that security was indeed about to become involved, just not in the way she imagined. And the man whose name she so confidently dropped as a weapon was about to become the very reason her world would come crashing down around her designer shoes as the confrontation, in first class, reached a fever pitch. Madison made a decision. This situation had escalated beyond her authority to manage, beyond the usual passenger disputes over armrests or reclined seats. With a discreet hand signal to her colleague, she initiated the protocol for serious cabin disruptions. "I'm going to speak with the captain," she informed both parties, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "Please remain in your assigned seats until this matter is resolved." As Madison made her way to the cockpit, the cabin hummed with tension. Passengers exchanged glances, some openly filming now, others pretending not to notice while absorbing every detail. Meanwhile, in a secured conference room deep within the airport's restricted zone, Xavier Brenham stood at the head of a table surrounded by 8 of his top agents. The room was soundproofed, swept for electronic surveillance, and guarded by 2 additional agents outside. On the table before them lay detailed intelligence briefings on potential threats to American interests. "The authorities have confirmed increased chatter around tourist destinations," Xavier explained, his voice carrying the measured gravity that had become his professional signature. "While there's no specific threat, I want our presence to be felt but not obvious. We're on vacation officially, unofficially. I need eyes and ears at all major locations." The agents nodded in understanding. This was the delicate dance of counter-terrorism work, being present without creating panic, vigilant without disrupting civilian life. Each agent at the table was elite, selected not just for their tactical skills, but for their ability to blend seamlessly into tourist environments. As the briefing continued, Xavier felt his phone vibrate in his pocket once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Years of experience had taught him to distinguish between the vibration patterns of different notifications. These weren't emails or news alerts. These were text messages, multiple in a row. Given the limited number of people who had access to his personal number, this triggered an immediate internal alert. He discreetly checked his screen while Agent Winters continued reviewing evacuation protocols. 3 messages from Agent Lopez, all marked urgent. The first made his blood run cold. Situation developing with Zara on aircraft. Racist passenger confrontation escalating. Captain being called. Xavier's expression betrayed nothing as he read the messages. But inside, 2 powerful forces collided. The FBI director responsible for a critical security briefing and the father whose child was facing harassment. It was the eternal conflict that had defined his career as a single parent in a high-stakes position. "Winters, take over the briefing," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for questions. "Complete the operational assignments and rendezvous on the aircraft. I need to return immediately." The team recognized the shift in their director's demeanor, the subtle transformation from measured to urgent. They'd all worked with him long enough to know that very few things could interrupt a security briefing of this importance. Whatever was happening on that plane, it was serious. Back on the aircraft, the situation had deteriorated further. The captain, a veteran pilot named Michael Harrington with 30 years of commercial aviation experience, had emerged from the cockpit to assess the disruption, delaying his departure. At 58, Captain Harrington had seen almost every type of passenger conflict imaginable, but the naked prejudice displayed in this confrontation made even him uncomfortable. "Ladies, what seems to be the problem?" he asked, his authoritative presence temporarily quieting the heated exchange. Before Madison could provide context, Bethany Caldwell seized the opening. "Captain, thank goodness!" she exclaimed, her voice dripping with manufactured relief. "This girl has taken my window seat and your flight attendant is refusing to correct the situation. My husband runs the Justice Department, and I can assure you this kind of treatment will not be tolerated. This girl needs to be removed immediately." Captain Harrington turned to Madison, who quickly explained the actual situation. Both passengers assigned seats, the verification of their boarding passes, and Bethany's escalating demands and threats. "Miss Caldwell," the captain said after listening carefully, "I understand you're disappointed about not having a window seat, but our assignments are final once boarding passes are issued. Miss Braham is in her correct seat." Bethany's face contorted with frustration. The narrative she constructed, that she was the victim of poor service, that her status entitled her to special treatment, was collapsing around her. In desperation, she pivoted to a new approach. "I don't feel comfortable or safe sitting next to her," Bethany declared loudly, ensuring other passengers would hear. "As a taxpayer and the wife of a senior government official, I demand different accommodations." The implication was clear. Her discomfort stemmed not from legitimate safety concerns, but from the race of her seatmate. The statement hung in the air, its ugliness impossible to disguise with polite euphemisms. Throughout this exchange, Zara had maintained her silence, retreating into the protective emotional shell that children of public figures often develop. But something about this last statement, the blatant prejudice, the invocation of taxpayer status as if it granted special rights to demean others, finally broke through her composure. "My father will be back soon," she said, her voice quiet but steady, carrying the unmistakable confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are and what support stands behind them. "Please, just leave me alone until then." It was a simple statement of fact, not a threat. But it was the first time Zara had directly engaged since the initial seat verification. All eyes turned to her, several passengers noting the dignity with which the teenage girl handled herself in the face of such hostility. Bethany, however, saw only an opportunity to mock. "Oh, I'm terrified," she exclaimed with theatrical sarcasm, placing a hand over her heart in mock fear. "Who, Daddy? A baggage handler? The man who cleans the toilets?" Her laughter was sharp, meant to wound. "Listen, little girl, whatever your father does, he doesn't have the authority my husband wields. Raymond Caldwell can make people disappear with a phone call." The threat, thinly veiled as it was, caused Captain Harrington's expression to harden. "Miss Caldwell, I must warn you that threatening other passengers is—" He was interrupted by a sudden shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Like animals sensing a predator, passengers fell silent, attention drawing to the front of the first-class section where a commanding figure had appeared. Xavier Brenham stood in the entryway, still dressed in the impeccable suit he'd worn to his security briefing. At 6'2", with the athletic build of someone who maintained rigorous physical training despite his administrative position, his presence filled the space in a way that went beyond mere physical dimensions. It was the quiet authority he carried, the focused intensity of his gaze as it swept the cabin and locked onto the confrontation in row 3. As Xavier moved purposefully down the aisle, a remarkable thing happened. In seats scattered throughout first class, 4 individuals straightened almost imperceptibly. Agent Lopez 3 rows back, Agent Chen near the window in row 7, Agent Rodriguez in the last row, and Agent Patel by the galley. Though they made no obvious movements, their alertness level shifted in perfect synchronization with their director's arrival. They were a team, suddenly visible after hiding in plain sight. Captain Harrington's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Xavier. Not from media coverage, the FBI counterterrorism chief rarely sought publicity, but from the high-level security briefings that senior pilots received. This was no ordinary passenger returning to his seat. This was one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the United States. "What's happening here?" Xavier asked, his voice deceptively quiet, yet carrying an undercurrent of authority that silenced the entire cabin. His eyes moved from his daughter to Bethany Caldwell to the captain, assessing the situation with the rapid precision of someone trained to evaluate threats in seconds. Zara's expression betrayed nothing to casual observers, but Xavier could read the subtle signs of her distress: the slightly too perfect posture, the controlled breathing pattern she used when upset, the way her fingers curled against the armrest. His daughter was practicing exactly what he taught her about maintaining composure under pressure, and while professionally that made him proud, paternally it made his blood boil. As Captain Harrington began explaining the situation, Xavier's focus narrowed onto Bethany Caldwell with laser precision. He recognized the type immediately, someone who weaponized connections and status, who believed rules existed for others. Someone who had likely spent years dropping her husband's name to intimidate service workers and gain unearned advantages. The irony that she had chosen today, this flight, and his daughter as her target would have been almost amusing if it weren't so infuriating. What Bethany Caldwell couldn't possibly know was that Raymond Caldwell, the man whose name she so carelessly wielded as a threat, had been appointed to his position at Xavier's specific recommendation. They met monthly for security briefings where Raymond deferentially addressed him as Director Brenham. As Xavier stood in that aisle, the confrontation had reached its turning point. 2 worlds were about to collide: the privileged bubble Bethany Caldwell had constructed around herself and the reality of consequences that Xavier Brenham represented. In seconds, everything would change, and not a single person on that aircraft would ever forget what they were about to witness. Time seemed to slow as Xavier moved through the cabin toward his daughter. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, the walk of a man who never needed to rush because power naturally waited for him. Bethany remained oblivious to the approaching storm, still ranting to the captain about her husband's importance, about how she'd demand an investigation into this discriminatory treatment. "And when Raymond hears about this, he'll have her badge and yours. Do you have any idea the kind of clearance my husband has? The kind of people who answer his calls?" Xavier paused at the edge of row 3, allowing her to continue digging the hole she'd never escape from. His expression revealed nothing, a skill honed through years of interrogations and high-stakes negotiations. Only the subtle tightening of his jaw betrayed the fury building beneath his professional veneer. Then, as he reached the row where his daughter sat, something extraordinary happened. Throughout the cabin, like a choreographed sequence rehearsed to perfection, the 4 agents in different parts of first class stood simultaneously. They rose without fanfare, without announcement, 4 impeccably dressed professionals whose postures and alert gazes instantly identified them as law enforcement to anyone with the experience to recognize such things. They didn't draw weapons or make aggressive movements. They simply stood, establishing their presence and alertness with silent precision. Their director was around, and all had to stand to respect him. The synchronized movement created an immediate effect. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice the confrontation now stared openly. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to diminish as complete silence fell across the cabin. Everyone sensed that something significant was unfolding. Captain Harrington's expression shifted from professional concern to immediate recognition as he registered Xavier's presence. "Director Brenham," the captain said, his tone shifting to one of profound respect. "I apologize for the disturbance involving your daughter. We were just resolving the situation. The word director landed like a thunderclap in the silent cabin. Bethany's head snapped toward Xavier, her expression still clutching at indignation even as confusion began to seep in. The title registered, but its implications hadn't yet penetrated her certainty that she was the most important person in this scenario. With deliberate calm, Xavier reached into his jacket and withdrew his credentials, allowing the FBI shield to catch the cabin lighting as he briefly displayed it before returning it to his pocket. The gesture wasn't theatrical. It was simply confirmatory, a formality for a man whose authority typically preceded him. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Bethany's face. The pieces were beginning to assemble in her mind, though the full picture remained just beyond her grasp. She looked from Xavier to the captain to the agents now positioned throughout the cabin, her brain scrambling to recalibrate a scenario spinning rapidly beyond her control. "I don't understand what's happening," she said, her voice losing its strident confidence. "Who are you people? Why are you surrounding me?" Xavier's response came with the quiet precision of a surgeon's blade. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, pronouncing her name with perfect clarity to ensure there could be no misunderstanding. "I believe you know my name, even if you don't recognize my face." "Your husband certainly does." A pause, perfectly timed. "Your husband Raymond reports directly to me." The color drained from Bethany's face so rapidly that passengers several rows away could observe the transformation. Her expression collapsed from righteous indignation to dawning horror as the implications cascaded through her consciousness. The husband whose name she'd been weaponizing throughout this confrontation, the source of her perceived power and untouchability, reported to the father of the girl she'd been harassing. That's not possible," Bethany stammered, though her expression betrayed that she knew it was not only possible, but catastrophically true. Xavier's gaze never wavered. "I've heard everything you've said to my daughter. Every word, every implication, every threat, the entire cabin held its breath." Passengers who had been recording the confrontation continued to do so with renewed intensity. Recognizing they were witnessing something extraordinary, Bethany's face completed its transformation from smug entitlement to abject terror. The realization that she had spent the last 20 minutes threatening, demeaning, and attempting to intimidate the daughter of her husband's superior hit her with the force of a physical blow. She whispered, I didn't know she was your daughter, sir. I would never—" "Never what, exactly?" Xavier interrupted. "Never have demanded that my daughter be removed from her assigned seat because you wanted it? Never have suggested she didn't belong in first class? Never have threatened to have flight staff fired for following proper procedures? Never have invoked your husband's name to intimidate others if you'd known someone with greater authority was listening?" Bethany's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, the perfect picture of a predator suddenly recognizing itself as prey. Xavier's voice remained steady. "Your apology isn't owed to me, Mrs. Caldwell. It's owed to my daughter." Bethany turned slowly toward Zara, her face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Resentment at being forced into this position warred with the desperate need to somehow mitigate the damage she'd done to her husband's career. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I apologize for suggesting you didn't belong here and for the things I said about your father. I was completely out of line." Zara simply nodded once, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology, but acknowledging that it had been offered. Captain Harrington stepped forward. "Director Brenham, given the nature of this incident, I'm prepared to have Miss Caldwell removed from the flight if you feel that would be appropriate." Xavier considered, then shook his head. "That won't be necessary, Captain. We can all be civil adults for the duration of this flight. But I do believe alternative seating arrangements would be appropriate under the circumstances." Within minutes, Bethany Caldwell was escorted to a middle seat in economy, while her former first-class seat was offered to an elderly woman with a walking cane who had been struggling with legroom. The symmetry of the exchange was lost on no one. As the agents returned silently to their seats and the flight attendants prepared for departure, Xavier finally sat beside his daughter. "You didn't have to do all that," Zara said softly. "I could have handled it." "I know you could have," Xavier replied. "But you shouldn't have to face bigotry alone. Not when I'm here." The rest of the flight carried a quiet weight. a father and daughter closer than they had been in years, bound not just by blood, but by the shared knowledge of what it meant to stand firm with dignity in the face of ugliness.